Welcome, folks. We'll get going in just a minute or two as folks continue to file into the webinar. Please stand by. Hi, folks. If you're just joining us, we are just about to get going. Thank you for being with us, and we'll get started in just a minute. All right. Here we are at 12:02, so I think we will get our party started here. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for our Irving Institute webinar. Welcome very much to our event today. My name is Amanda Graham, and I am the Director of Academic Programs for the Irving Institute for Energy and Society at Dartmouth. And it is my great pleasure to moderate today's webinar. What we're going to do today is introduce you to the Institute's leadership and to our new 2030 strategic plan. So we're very glad to have you here to learn alongside of us and to bring your questions in. We will have a stretch of sharing and discussing key aspects of our 2030 strategic plan, and then we will open up a Q&A at the end of the session. So if you have any questions at any point during the session, please put them in the Q&A box. See the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. The chat is disabled, so the Q&A is the only place for you to put in your questions. We will get to as many questions as possible at the end of today's webinar. But first, I'm really delighted to give our Institute leaders the opportunity to introduce themselves. So Professor Jeff Parker, could you please say hello?
Absolutely, and thank you everyone for being here. So I'm Jeff Parker. One of the hats that I wear is as a professor of engineering at Thayer School, and the other hat that I wear is relatively more recent as faculty director of the Irving Institute for Energy and Society. And on June 30th, I believe, I will complete my 9th year at Dartmouth, which is pretty exciting.
Terrific, Jeff. And sliding over to Derek Walker.
Hello, everyone. It's so good to have you with us today. I'm Derek Walker. I am the Executive Director of the Irving Institute for Energy and Society. And unlike Jeff, I am completing my 9th day on the job. So it's a really wonderful opportunity for me to get to know friends and community members at such an early point in my tenure. I came to Dartmouth after serving for 2 decades in senior leadership roles at the environmental nonprofit organization EDF, or Environmental Defense Fund.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, both Derek and Jeff. And as we dig into this afternoon's conversation, I'd like to point folks to the summary of our 2030 strategic plan that we have posted at the Institute website. You should see a link to that, a summary of that plan coming up via the Zoom chat function. So please feel free to refer to that plan today and in the future. And so as we get started, Jeff, you have been leading the development of this Institute's strategic plan looking out to 2030 for a number of months now and finally getting it past the finish line. Can you briefly tell us what's in it and why is it important at this particular moment for the Institute and for Dartmouth?
Yeah, absolutely, Amanda. I mean, we started that effort a little over a year ago, honestly, and the reason it was important is to clarify the mission and the goals of the Institute and to really help explain, what we're going to be doing and emphasizing over the next 5 years. And so that's our kind of S2030 plan. What's in it is what you might expect. So we've got 3 pillars that we've organized the Institute in. So we have a research and translation pillar, and we'll talk about that a bit later, a teaching and learning pillar, and an engagement pillar. And all of these serve at the high level for our vision and our mission, which is to help accelerate the transition to a low and no carbon energy future. And with the constraints that we want to do that in an equitable, affordable, and sustainable way.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeff. I really love that one of the things that we really emphasize at the Institute is the interdisciplinarity of energy and energy systems. And I wonder, could you describe how the Institute and the new plan helps us to facilitate interdisciplinary collaboration at and even beyond Dartmouth?
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things, if you think about where we sit in the Dartmouth system. So we're a unit that reports into the provost's office, and that's very intentional so that we're pan Dartmouth. And then that way we can create collaborations more easily that wouldn't necessarily have happened because we can provide some organizational infrastructure. In some cases, we provide some seed grant funding. We have a really strong power of convening. And so that's something that if you look across kind of from top to bottom, research and translation, teaching and learning, we create opportunities and vehicles for faculty, staff, students, and a broader ecosystem to engage on specific research initiatives and translation initiatives and increasingly educational initiatives, where we're inviting people directly in a collaborative way. Um, and then, speaking of collaborative, people might have heard of the Climate Collaborative, which is Dartmouth's way to try to organize the many different touch points that Dartmouth has around climate, and Irving is one of those. So we can contribute to that by actively engaging with arts and sciences, Thayer, Tuck, Geisel, Guarini, and the various centers and institutes across Dartmouth, really to try to support and enhance, sort of the 1+1 = 3 idea rather than having just a lot of siloed and unconnected efforts. And then to bring that to life in research and teaching, and one of the areas that we can help contribute is our bit of turning Dartmouth campus into a living lab by helping do some of the coordination, which is really one of the cornerstones of the collaborative goals.
It's really an exciting time for
Yeah,
us to
it's
be
really neat.
on campus. There's just so much activity and enthusiasm and opportunity to work together. And it's a particularly exciting time and moment, Derek, for you to be joining us because you have lived some of this, right, in your past lives and worlds, right, in terms of how do you build coalitions, how do you create cross connections and collaborations. Can you tell us about what you're bringing that previous orientation to Dartmouth and to the Institute?
Absolutely. I think that energy is a quintessential interdisciplinary issue. And part of the reason why the Institute is energy and society is to really evoke how foundational energy systems, energy access, energy justice, energy affordability are to individuals, communities, and societies functioning and cohesion. And a lot of that sensibility that I have and that I bring to Dartmouth was cultivated over the last 2 decades, where I built teams working on social and behavioral science, applied economics, climate science, people who went out in the field and met with community leaders to understand what the pros and cons are of putting industrial facilities in a particular area and what that meant for jobs and what that meant for environmental and ecological protection. All those things intersect in our ability to really get at solutions that are not only robust and rigorous from a scientific and economic perspective, but that are relevant to the real world in which we're living. And when you put all that together and think about the ways in which data and analytics are changing and the way that people think about applying new data and analytical tools to problem solving, I think that's one of many ways that Dartmouth and Jeff and Thayer in particular are really at the leading edge. And so all of that together suggests that we have a unique moment to bring people together both at and beyond Dartmouth to make an impact on a wide swath of issues with everything we do.
This is why we are so delighted to have you on board. And congratulations for being here on day 9, and wishes for many, many more. With that sort of overview on interdisciplinarity and collaboration and where both Derek and Jeff are coming from, let's shift into some of the meat and potatoes of the strategic plan, which, as you mentioned, Jeff, has these 3 main pillars. So can we talk a little bit about the teaching and learning pillar and how that pillar really helps us to advance our strategy? Jeff, I'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the highest level, our goals here are first in our local community, as in with our students. We want to ensure that a majority of Dartmouth students are exposed to issues around the energy transition. And that can be relatively light, from attending a seminar or a speech, to heavier ways of engagement. And I'll go through a number of those in a minute. Next is through these investments and efforts and pulling together to become a nationally and internationally recognized leader in energy education. With the Dartmouth twist, which is that it's going to be multidisciplinary because we're rooted in a 250 plus year old liberal arts institution. Because what you'll find in lots of places, they'll have energy programs, but they'll often be within one of the divisions, a science division, an engineering school, a business school. Here we're very intentionally trying to be at the center and pulling together from lots of different schools and disciplines. And then ultimately to create leaders who can have impact. So let me kind of walk through what that means. If you go back to the high level goal, we want to accelerate the transition to a low and no carbon energy future. And I say the word accelerate very intentionally because you could look and say, hey, this is already underway. We're good. Just let the scientists do what they do, let the engineers do what they do, let the financiers do what they do, and the system will transition and that'll take care of itself. The economics will work out. For lots of reasons, we would argue that it's not going nearly fast enough. And as we start to see sort of rapid economic development in kind of across the world, across the globe, and people who want to have the same standards of living that we've enjoyed for so many years, we really do need to change things. Otherwise, we'll get the worst of climate change as kind of a byproduct of the current energy system. So if you then break the barriers down, you can say, well, we've got technical barriers, and so one way to accelerate would be to make direct investments in solving some of the technology challenges, and so that would be an area you would go after. You've got literally financial barriers, which is how do you finance, especially because you're dealing with a lot of investment that needs to take place in the global south, where a lot of the historical emissions have taken place in the global north, and those are the more developed areas. Self-interest would suggest that the areas that have capital would want to deploy it in areas that are relatively poorer in capital. But that's not an obvious thing that you can solve overnight. And so that's a big barrier that's complicated and will take a fair bit of effort. Um, then you've got the issues just of essential policy. One of the reasons we're so excited to have Derek on board, because those have a sort of a pace and a rhythm that are very slow. And we've certainly seen that in the technology world. And for information systems, internet technology, but we see it very similarly in the energy world, where some of the kind of current policy frameworks are not equal to the moment. For example, how long does it take to build a substation? How do you get transmission capacity so that you can move energy from resource-rich areas that may be relatively low density population to the population centers where you need them? And those are really big, challenging issues. But if we're going to solve these problems, have to go faster. And then if you go to the and society part of the Institute, that's really around a lot of the sociological issues and cultural issues that are impeding, progress, if you will, or at least slowing it down. And you have to have a lot of empathy because people don't want to change, or it may not be easy for them to. And so if you think about the teaching and learning and you kind of take these barriers, then we think, well, how do we line up some of our most impactful sort of resources, which are our people and particularly our students? And we really think of it as a funnel. We think of there's an awareness. There are a lot of people who are sort of have an angst, but they're not necessarily aware of the system, the issues, the areas, the sort of how things work. Then there's a commitment. Okay, I'm interested in this. I can see myself as a player. I might start to do a research project. I might go do a trek. I
Mhm.
can start to really engage some of my personal time. And we've seen, I mean, the students here are nothing short of incredible in the way that they will dig in and do things. Um, then on our side, we can try to provide tools, frameworks, analysis capabilities. Derek mentioned data analytics and machine learning and AI. That's something that we've done a lot of work on at the college and are continuing to do so. And we'll bring that right into the curriculum. Lots of co-curricular programming. And one thing that's really exciting is this fall, we're launching a new Master of Energy Transition that's designed really to be I hate to say a capstone experience because well, let's wait and see what we do in a few years. But right now, that'll be one of our sort of biggest investments in training and really the effort to try to match students with careers and jobs where they can start to have impact and taking down some of the barriers that I mentioned a few minutes ago. So this is a super exciting time because we've got a lot of things in motion and in play, and um, that I think line up in pretty direct ways to the mission that we're trying to go after.
That's fantastic, Jeff. Thank you. And I'd love to ask a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
You mentioned that what we're really training folks for is the experience of working in the world. Can you talk a little bit about how in the Master of Energy Transition, we're seeking to provide that kind of experiential learning?
Yeah, one of the things that I really appreciate about Dartmouth, and I was a faculty member at Tulane University in New Orleans for 18 years prior to coming here, and I was at MIT as a doctoral student before that. Um, and Tulane was great and learned a lot there, and we can talk about that. But one of the kind of philosophical points that I very much appreciate about Dartmouth is this emphasis on teams and applied work where people are absolutely willing to deal with goo. And by goo, I mean a real problem from a real organization. There's not a test or a problem set. I haven't given an exam in a day since I've gotten here because that's not how I'm teaching. I invite real companies, real nonprofits, government organizations to bring specific problems into the classroom and then get teams of multidisciplinary students organized with a lot of support from my own doctoral students, from other faculty members, honestly, from the companies themselves, some of whom are really great partners and used to working in this way. That ethos is wired into the design of the Master of Energy Transition, where at least every term the students will have an externally sponsored set of projects to choose from, where they'll have to grapple with some real issue and then have to produce a real outcome with all of the scaffolding and all of the support that we at the Institute can provide. Honestly, in conjunction with many of the people who might be on this call, because these are our external stakeholders, alums, board members, um, dedicated staff at the college and beyond. So we're going to invite all of those kind of concentric circles to come in and help these students really learn and then be successful.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. And I really appreciate that sort of call to action for folks who are on this call to consider. So let's pivot now to our second pillar, right, which is our research and translation pillar. And what I'd love to do is hear a little bit about you from you about what do we mean when we say research and translation, right? I think folks have an idea of what research kind of means, but then we're sort of expanding that in our language here to talk about research and translation. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, let me actually take first whack at this, and then I want to pivot quickly to Derek because I'm going to talk about first the research. So if you go again back up to the goals, which is to accelerate the energy transition, um, we can make direct investments in technology, in scholarship, in science, in various ways. Um, the ones that we will tend to select on are going to be closer to the D or the R&D. In other words, things that can be implemented, deployed in kind of the 3 to 10 year time frame. So it's not, and there's an incredible need, by the way, for fundamental science. That has to continue to be funded, but we don't have the resources to go after things that are going to go after, decades out. And honestly, the issues are playing out much faster than that. So we're really looking at things that can have a direct impact in, say, the 3 to 10 year time frame. Um, However, that can be implemented or can have an impact is a lot different than will have an impact. And so when we think about impact, well, what do we mean? We really mean policy. We mean commercialization. And I'll hand it over to Derek because he's had a lot more experience than I have in the policy realm.
I think there's a huge appetite and opportunity to, convert the world-leading scholarship and research that's happening across campus into, solutions that are ready to be considered by policymakers at all levels. And that's one of the most exciting things that I think is on our doorstep. I mean, just in the first couple weeks here at Dartmouth, I've gotten a firsthand view on some of the really cutting edge work that we're doing to figure out what carbon removal strategies could be put in place that could really take a huge uh, missing link out of the climate science, put a missing piece into the climate science puzzle. I've learned a lot about our groundbreaking work on biofuels, a lot about how we're thinking about the economic impacts of investments in communities and in technologies that some of which have been galvanized by federal and state policies over the last several years. And so we are not just doing the foundational research, but we're also in a position to deliver at or before the moment when something becomes a live policy issue. And that to me is something that is unique for an academic institution that we're striving for. And some of that is that our external network and many of the folks who are here today are part of that, can help deliver to us a concrete and current understanding of where the ball is rolling and where we need to be having the most impact. Certainly, there's no dearth of need for solutions across the energy transition landscape, and we have really remarkable assets here to dig into those issues. And so I've already seen it with even I wanted to go back sort of what something that I think sits at the intersection of a number of our objectives is something I was doing in the last couple of days, where I was with folks having policy meetings in DC, undergraduate students having policy meetings in DC that were directly related to 7 days that they had just spent on the road in Appalachia in a program that we sponsor with the Dartmouth Sustainability Office to show them every dimension of the economic footprint in Appalachia as it relates to energy, the cultural impacts, the economic and environmental impacts, and the new energy sources that are being increasingly looked at as the cornerstone of economic diversification. Those students were blown away by that experience. And then they came in to policy spaces in DC and had questions that are more sophisticated, I can tell you, and insights than some of the people that have been working on the Hill for 2 decades. And that is just something that I think brings our community closer to the real world problems and challenges that we all really need to be looking at squarely.
I really appreciate your observation here about the way in which we try to ensure that all parts of our learning and inquiry community, right, are engaged. The undergraduates, the graduate students, the faculty, the staff, our alumni and partner communities, right? This village needs to be diverse and broad, right, in order for us to leverage, what we're learning for what the world needs to pick up and run with. So thank you for that, Derek. Jeff, can you talk a little bit about the commercialization dimension of that translation agenda?
Absolutely. So if you look at some of the projects that have received seed grant funding, for example, and one that I'm really sort of taken with is this use of essentially biomedical engineering tools or protein discovery AI tools getting applied increasingly to the material science realm. So Thayer has a very active computational material science group. And one of the things that they're doing is searching for cheaper, easier to produce, more locally producible permanent magnets that really underlie a lot of what's going to be needed to do electrification in the economy, which is one of the pathways toward decarbonization. Um, so that's great, and that's going to be an excellent science project, but it doesn't necessarily move the needle on accelerating the energy transition. But what does, and this goes back to a lot of Dartmouth's sort of DNA, is building a company around it. One of the things that's always fascinated me at Dartmouth and at Thayer School in particular is that over half of the faculty have been company founders. And the point there is, and I always kind of wondered, I said, well, okay, we teach, we do research. What's that about? And what it's about is translation and impact. It's not enough to have cool things that you do in a lab for everyone. I mean, for some disciplines, that is actually exactly what you should be doing. But in others, and in particular in some of the technology and engineering and computer science spaces, you'd really like to move that into something that you can aggregate private capital to then scale to then have impact. And that's something that we've seen. If you look at Dartmouth, they're a top 5 per capita entrepreneurial sort of alumni base. And so that dovetails really well into what's been happening over the decades. So we kind of jumped into that last year. We ran the Green Shot Accelerator program, which was a collaboration between the Magnuson Center, which is Dartmouth's entrepreneurship kind of hub, and then the Irving Institute, and had 9 companies that were identified and run through. And now we're sort of looking at that. That was a pilot. We're kind of uh, essentially streamlining that, and we're also looking at going further up the funnel, where we can help students, faculty, staff, people on campus do entrepreneurial venture creation to move ideas into practice. And again, that's something that's in the DNA. Half of the students in the Master of Engineering Management program at Thayer have applied to the MEM program's entrepreneur kind of grant and programmatic effort. So we're reasonably confident that there's a lot of appetite for that just based on sort of the past. And so that's an area that we'll be building out in the coming years. And much like some of the other things, we'll be inviting external stakeholders to mentor, participate, and be part of that.
Excellent, excellent. And it really is true that entrepreneurship and the startup vibe is something that we see all over campus, right? And we continue to lean into our partnerships with Thayer, with Tuck, even with Geisel, right? In terms of
Oh,
how do we, leverage the opportunities to think and to innovate in a space that can bring things to up to scale in a commercial space. So thank you for that. I want to remind folks that if you have questions, we're heading into the home stretch here of our official presentation. So please add your questions into the Q&A as we turn now to our third pillar, which is the pillar of engagement. And so the question here, what do we mean by engagement, and how in our the context of our 2030 strategic plan, and how do we plan to, and how are we engaging the Dartmouth community and the broader community in the Institute's initiatives?
Well, Jeff mentioned a little bit earlier that some of this is embedded in our other strategies. The idea that we want students that come to campus to feel like they have an exposure to the energy transition and the many issues in the energy transition as part of the foundation that Dartmouth gives them. So that, in a way, is a type of the engagement that we're doing with the community. It's also about bringing external experts, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and issues that they carry with them to campus to provide a forum for the campus community to learn, to ask questions, to mingle with those individuals who aren't usually part of campus life. We have a couple that Amanda will mention even coming up that are really excellent examples. So I think part of it is not only do we have a rich array of people who are on campus residentially in Dartmouth who have been successful, as they say, out in the real world, but we also want to use our networks and our expertise to draw others into Hanover, into this community. We also want to be out in the world in places where energy transition solutions and innovations are most relevantly and robustly being discussed. My first week on the job was spent at a major energy conference in Texas, where the opportunity there to tap into leading industry players, tech companies, other universities, understand what partnership opportunities are available to us, what are the gaps that need to be filled in research and scholarship. There were so many alumni entrepreneurs that came by Dartmouth's booth at that conference just to say, I'm here, I'm Dartmouth, how can I give back? So many of the things I learned and were inspired by that have driven me in my career first took root on campus in Dartmouth. That was a that is so unquantifiably powerful that I think that is one way that we accelerate our impact by being out in those spaces where people come together. And we have several other examples of doing that. We'll be planning a presence at New York Climate Week. We've had a lot of other engagement with other energy related conferences, plus a lot of opportunities to do things like boot camps and essentially short courses on either technical or quasi-political issues that are so important in this space that we want to build capacity for. So this is a huge priority to have an engagement that reaches across campus, across the Upper Valley community and beyond.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Derek, for helping us to articulate the ways in which we are, opening our arms really and engaging with our colleagues in the nonprofit space, in the industry space, in the academic and other university space, as well as in the government space. We are. It really does take a wide, broad, and diverse global village, right, for us to get traction on our energy transition challenges. Jeff, did you have anything in addition that you wanted to say about the engagement agenda, or shall I jump to the questions that are popping up in our Q&A?
Um, just that you shouldn't view these things as standalone pillars. I mean, you can see very
Great.
quickly that each, for example, the work that Derek was just doing in DC has an educational component while it's also an engagement component and a translation component. And so these pillars are really meant to be, sort of directly reinforcing one another. Um, so that would really be the only thing that I would say, because and then we're absolutely kind of digging in on things like uh, the climate week. We may have a presence at RE Plus. And then the other one I would say is we've got a kind of a Dartmouth wide look and kind of think through about our international footprint and then the various collaborations that we're putting together internationally. And the reason I mention that is, in addition to a really great visit that we just had at CERAWeek in Houston, we helped organize a delegation with 7 faculty members and a number of staff to go to India. So Dave Coates, the provost, and I, and a number of other faculty went to a couple places. Dave went to Delhi, and then we all were in Bangalore at the India Institute of Science. And there's a great hunger there for collaboration across both the research, but also the teaching and education space. And so our engagement there, really does support both the teaching and the learning and the research aspects of the Institute. So it's again, it's a really neat time.
Super. And thank you for tying it all together, right? You're absolutely, we don't want to be segmented. We want to be integrative in all things that we do. So let's go to the questions in the Q&A, and thanks folks for submitting them. Keep them coming. Our first question from John Gage, energy policy is climate policy. As long as fossil fuels pollution of greenhouse gases remains free, the largest market failure in history will continue to be the main cause of anthropogenic global warming. How will the Irving Institute work to educate the public and leaders about effective and equitable policies to address this market failure, such as a steadily rising, fully rebated carbon fee on fossil fuel production, right? So we've heard for decades now about carbon tax. How would you respond to this question about our educational work about policies in
Yeah,
that
I'll,
sense?
I'll take first crack, but then I'm going to invite Derek to weigh in. But if you look at the design of our Master of Energy Transition, I think it's literally tailored to this type of an issue and set of questions, because we're drawing on 4 schools, 3 of whom will be contributing specific courses. So we have a technology of current and future energy systems, which is really the granular, hey, what's a tea kettle? Okay, a spinning turbine or spinning hot things. Okay, well, how does PV fit into that? What are the storage? What are the material science sort of advances that are underpinning this? And then we have an ability or a course that's focused on what are the types of data, what are the analytics that you can do so that you understand both the technology but also the economics. And then at a higher level, how would you model an energy system so that you can do sectoral trade-offs? And so that when you have policy implementations, you understand how those things bounce. And then from the kind of business side, what are the economics? What are the markets? What is a carbon market? Where have they worked? Where have they failed? What are financing mechanisms? What sorts of structures? And then we very directly have a climate science and policy course that goes to this exact issue, which is, hey, let's look at the actual science, what's happening in the atmosphere, and then what are some of the policy issues? And we have an energy law and policy course, and then we have a course directly aimed at understanding the and society, the societal implications of the systems. So I'd like to think that we're taking that one head on and trying to take a holistic view to expose our students. But we're doing more than that, because in building those 9 graduate courses, we're also creating a team that goes across Dartmouth, plus our extended partners as we bring in for help on this collaboration, which then provides sort of the relationships and the frameworks for spin-out work. And it helps us develop the expertise to deliver this kind of content, which we would then expect to infuse through our other programming. So I love the question, and I hope that what we're doing really addresses it in the spirit of it, and not just sort of at a surface level.
Derek.
Well, I think that's a great answer, Jeff. And I'll just say, as someone who worked on carbon pricing for 2 decades at Environmental Defense Fund, um, the environmental community and other advocates and educators who tried to build support for carbon tax often fell short in bringing the end society part of these issues to bear. There wasn't adequate discussion about the pace of transition, the availability of capital, the affordability factors, the need to make sure that foundational infrastructure is in place to support the new resources that need to be integrated into the system in response to that sort of a policy driver. And so I do agree it is a great question, and I agree with Jeff that it's that sort of multivariable thinking that we're trying to instill in students in the master's program, and also a capacity that we're trying to bring across the whole community so that people think about stop thinking in silos when they think about the major challenges of the day.
Excellent. James Merritt asks, who do we reach out to if we'd like to get more involved? My firm has a lot of renewable energy activity throughout Appalachia, as an example.
Well, I'm here to be a resource and a connector to the Dartmouth community and beyond. And so I would love to hear from anyone who wants to follow up from this conversation. I'm derek.b.walker@dartmouth.edu, and I'm happy to hear from anyone. And I think we're all about community building and connections. So thank you for that question.
And this is a very live activity, right? We are working actively over the next several months, right, to, in particular, to develop those industry and government and nonprofit opportunities for application experiences in the master's program,
Absolutely.
but also in our other activities. So now is a great time to reach out to Derek on that. Thanks,
For
Derek.
sure. For sure.
Okay, Molly Dunn asks, will any of the Institute's work be impacted either positively or negatively by the Trump administration's energy goals? This is a hot topic right now.
It really is. I'll take a sort of a narrow answer, and then if others want to weigh in, but um, some of our community members, our faculty members, they're seeing their funding be impacted, and Dartmouth writ large is sort of looking at the various scenarios. So I would say that while the impact has not been huge yet, it's starting to be felt. But there's still great work to be done and ways to go about it. So um, I think that's nuanced.
Yeah, and I would just say that the current moment that we're in, which is, volatile, but, emphasize ever changing, um, means that institutions that have a strong sense of self and a strong history and a strong core value, like this community does, can continue to play a really good role in um, bringing the facts forward on the challenges we face and the complexities. I mean, a lot of it is leaning into complexity. There's a lot of oversimplification out there in the way that solutions are being proposed at a very high, crassly political level. I think that we try to bring the opposite. We try to bring a very nuanced and uh, complex understanding of how things actually need to work. But I think that all of that, plus our ability to serve as a convener and a space where we actually have a dialogue series that we run in partnership with several other institutions, where we bring together cohorts of stakeholders that work on often incredibly thorny issues and often have never sat at the same table before, to try to develop not only solutions, but also a framework for how to move the relationship forward that focuses on common interests rather than immediately landing on the points of tension. And so I think those parts of our DNA can be especially powerful now.
Excellent. Agreed. The dialogue is really and seeking ways to foster that both on campus and off campus, it has to be part of our DNA.
And let me actually just
Yeah, please,
say,
Jeff.
and then hand it back over to you. Um, we literally have an uncommon dialogues effort, and one of our senior fellows, Dan Riker, has been leading that, and it's with New York and New England dams. And so the issue is a lot of the dams are ready for failure. They pose a danger. They could be removed. They could be rehabilitated. They could be repowered if they're serving hydro. And there are a lot of distinct interests, right to Derek and your point, Amanda, and getting the people around the table to find the points of common agreement and a framework for how to move forward is a lot more important than immediately going, I disagree with you, and sort of backing into a corner. And um, that's been really neat to see, and that's the kind of thing that we're hoping to identify other issues that we can help provide kind of a convening and then an analysis sort of toolkit so that you can be working from facts and common sort of analysis frameworks as opposed to everybody brings their own set of data, which isn't helpful. So I just wanted to point that out. Um,
One of the points that we heard this week with the students and with Derek is that these processes need to move at the speed of trust, right? And trust is not something that, comes out of thin air, and I think that that's what's important about a process of dialogue creation that we're really trying to foster. Thank you. Elise Allen asked us to comment on our work with Tuck and the Rever Center for Energy Sustainability and Innovation, and I'd love to take moderator's prerogative and jump in on that one. I'm very proud of one of the educational programs that we've developed over the last several years in collaboration with Tuck, which we call Tuck Lab Energy, and the LAB in Tuck Lab stands for Liberal Arts and Business. And so it is a not-for-credit, 1 week intensive program over the winter break where we bring together dozens of students, at least a couple of dozen students, with faculty and with practitioner scholars to really take a dive into not just energy systems, but the business angle on energy systems, and how can we help to sort of gear them up to appreciate the kinds of questions that they need to wrestle with, right? If they're contemplating a future in a startup or an entrepreneurship or in a corporate space, or even how to leverage those skills no matter what sector that they're working in ultimately as a career. And we've had students who have found that experience extremely helpful as they go on the job market, no matter what their job market may actually be. So our partnership with Tuck is very valuable for all aspects of what we're doing in the education space that I'm most connected with, and it's a growing activity. We are starting a new collaboration to bring together Tuck MBA students with our undergraduate students to share discussions on hot topics, as well as to do some informal peer-to-peer mentoring, because sometimes that that peer who is, just a few years out from ahead of you, can really be important as you're contemplating what you're going to do next, right? When you finish with your Dartmouth undergraduate degree. So thanks for asking that, Elise. Let me jump to a question from Charles Thomas asking if there will be a future cluster hire for faculty to bring more interdisciplinary research faculty to Dartmouth. A great question.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question and very topical because one of the really exciting things that's come out of the strategic planning process is uh, a renewed investment from President Bylock in staff and particularly in faculty at Dartmouth who are interested in digging into energy issues. And so, in fact, we're going to be bringing a number of new faculty to campus in both chair roles and then also as junior faculty. And Irving Institute will be participating in that, and these will be joint hires. And so we're working out the frameworks and the agreements with the various deans of the different schools for what that looks like. But the idea is that because we're multidisciplinary, we're this sort of hub and spoke, and we're able to connect across Dartmouth, that we'll bring people in who will contribute to the teaching of the institute. Gorini houses our graduate degree, our Master of Energy Transition, and then we also do co-curricular and undergraduate programming. Um, and then these faculty will also find a research home in the institute, and then work with one another, and they'll have support and participate in the life of the institute. So super question, and it's a really exciting time, and we're working that out kind of in real time. So more to come on that.
Excellent, thank you. I'd love to have you talk about where you may see gaps that we're trying to fill. So there's a question here about, are there any critical industries or disciplines that are currently not well represented at Dartmouth or in the Institute's community that in particular you'd really like to get a jump on to enhance and expand? And I'd love to hear from both of you on that question.
Yeah, so I'll take first. Anytime you do a gap assessment, then everybody immediately goes, "Oh, what about my thing?" And I don't necessarily see that there. So you have to be a little careful and always go back to, okay, what's the mission of the Institute? It's to accelerate the transition to a low and no carbon energy future. What are the barriers? And where is it that we need more capacity to address specific barriers? So, for example, in some of our government areas, we could easily have more horsepower in the policy space. We could easily see the need for more kind of horsepower or just more capacity. Horsepower is perhaps the wrong word in some of our sociological issues of sort of resistance to change. Certainly in energy economics, and then we've got some specific science areas that we could end up seeing more investments in. I think I think the broader point is that we're trying to create an effective community, and so we're going to be a little less worried about, oh, did this exact square get filled, or did we build an effective team that can work together and collaborate and make real progress together? So that's how I'm thinking about that, Amanda.
Great, thank you. Derek.
Yeah, and very much complementary to that, as we think about how we composed the master's program, it really was about looking at the whole set of tools and understandings that you need to be an effective leader and constructive collaborator in the energy transition out in the real world, and putting together that curriculum with a very intentional view on making sure that we were not siloing particular kinds of knowledge, but really bringing all of that together into one piece. And so I think that that's also an important thing. I do want to underline also what Jeff said about government. I mean, we're at a moment now, as with any political transition, where there are a lot of really strong recent government experts who are out there trying to continue having impact in the real world. And so we're going to be affiliating ourselves with folks who have created big programs and at the intersection of public and private sectors in government, and bringing them into the Dartmouth family and into the Dartmouth community to continue their work.
Excellent. Thank you both. So I'm going to close now with a big picture question. We've talked about many different initiatives that are ongoing or that are in near sight. We talked about a range of pillars and how we're approaching these with interdisciplinarity and with collaboration. How are we going to measure success? What are your thoughts about, what success will look like in 2030 as we look back?
So I think you look back to the strategic plan, and we look back to some of the pillars, and then we have a number of sort of goals under those. And I'll take the research and translation one, for example. So we've aligned that, and these, by the way, these are not going to be necessarily static, and I think that's important. But we've started with accelerating clean technology deployment. That's fairly broad, but we would like to stand that pillar up and then start to get collaborations and um, a really robust research program that then starts to feed a translation program. Similarly, we've got harnessing data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, which is just an exploding topic. Derek mentioned the energy conference we were at. It could just as easily have been an artificial intelligence conference, and that's sort of one of these, I think, sectoral, once in a generation changes that are sweeping through the economy. Going to have a huge impact on industry, on government, on education, and so we're going to lean into that and then sort of collaborate and take advantage of the various resources on campus and beyond. And then we've got a centering health and equity in the clean energy transition. And that's been an area where we've had great collaborations with our medical school. And we have research projects that have been submitted that really document the impact of the current energy system on health, like maternal health, for example. And then that gives us a biomarker or a tracking, think of it as almost as a dashboard, um, that you can track change and then see it in human health over time as these systems transition. And it also gives us a set of tools and mechanisms that we can do, international kind of benchmarking. So I think that's really exciting, and that does tie to sort of how the energy system is impacting the population of today, and then what's going to be happening going forward.
Derek, as we head into the final moments here.
Yeah, I think, Jeff was talking a little bit earlier about the funnel, where we are trying to engage and then give tools and then unleash the leaders of tomorrow. And I think that, by 2030, we're going to have launched and going to be several years into a really innovative and groundbreaking master's program where there's going to be a cohort of alums that are out there. I think that seeing them begin to have impact in the world, in companies, in nonprofits and financial institutions is going to be a huge marker of success. And then related to that, the ability to retain and proliferate a great faculty cohort to teach those classes is going to be huge. And then the faculty that we are able to bring to Dartmouth, having them be making the same kind of interdisciplinary impact on campus as the Institute is trying to have as a whole, and have like all these points of intersection between Irving and the larger community, so that the 1+1 is 3 formula that Jeff laid out earlier is evident. And we're still a startup in many ways. We're a much younger institute than a lot of our peers on other campuses. And so we are now at an inflection point, not just because of the external environment, but because of the robustness of the internal commitment. And so this next 5 years is going to be incredibly exciting. And I think that we're going to have some real concrete outcomes to point to that relate to all the different pillars that we've talked about today.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you both for really laying out for us sort of the behind the scenes view on our 2030 strategic plan. Again, I direct folks back to the summary that's on our website if you want more details. And I would love to now, as we close things out, do a bit of a call to action. So if you're here and you're learning about the Irving Institute, please join us. We have two really exciting events coming up that we want to make sure that you're aware of. They're both live streamed. The first is on April 7, just a week or so away. We have a bipartisan discussion on energy policy, which will feature the Honorable Dan Brouillette, the 15th U.S. Secretary of Energy, as well as Kevin Knobloch, who is the former Chief of Staff at DOE. So bringing a bipartisan perspective to what's happening in energy policy at this time. April 7th, please join us. May 1st, we have a Career Paths in Energy and Sustainability with the Honorable Miranda Ballantyne. Really excited to hear her thoughts about this particular moment and how we can all lean in with our careers and our Dartmouth energies. So I want to thank everyone for attending this session. Thank you, Jeff and Derek, for illuminating for us this moment in time for the Institute. We will follow up with everyone who attended with a very brief 4-question survey via email so that we can get your feedback and learn how to do what we do as best as possible for you. Thank you again for taking a moment to fill out that survey. We really do value your feedback. We value your time today, and we look forward to seeing you at these events and others in the future. Please join us. We need all the help. We all need all the help that we can get to shape energy futures that are sustainable, clean, affordable, reliable, equitable, and we're grateful for your time today. Thank you all. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Derek.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.